Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today is April the 19th, 2026, and we are here to talk about the world, current events, foreign policy, economics, you name it. We'll talk about it in another episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Hello,
Sire.
how are you today?
I'm doing rather well. How about yourself?
Kind of overate a little today, so stomach's a little bit upset with me on account of that. But other than that, can't complain.
Was it tasty at least?
It was it was decent.
What did you have?
Got it was a Subway.
Mmm.
I meant to get two 6-inch sandwiches, but circumstances were such that I accidentally ended up with a 6-inch and a foot long,
Oh. Did you have
which
both
is
of them?
apparent. Oh yeah,
Party on.
but that's apparently more than I can handle. So lesson learned.
Mm. Yeah, I remember back at UT Dallas, one of the fun games that I think Michael actually showed me this one was the Subway Challenge. You try to order all of the ingredients of your Subway sub without ever saying. It's harder than you think. Because when they ask, what kind of bread do you want? A lot of times you weren't quite ready for the question, and you say, and then you answer, just to kind of fill. But for the purpose of having really eloquent, efficient speech, you shouldn't add those in. There's a technical word for that. But we had the rule where if you say you have to go to the back of the line. So if you're there with like four friends and you say or there are people backed up behind you, you get punished. So you remember
Yeah.
that. You become very mindful of the ums.
Back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how's your week been?
It's been solid. I feel like there's been really good progress in me understanding the tempo and methodology of playing position one. I've been adding in another Dota hero, Naga Siren, who is another illusionist like Terrorblade, so you get to do some of that multi-location farming that not many Dota heroes can do. So that I think suits my StarCraft background. And the StarCraft MMR has been nice and high. I feel like I have a good grasp of what to do in my matchups at the moment. And the times that I lose in StarCraft are when I bump into a pro gamer or someone who has like a really well practiced gimmick that I didn't quite prepare for. But games have been good. The farm is in good order. Pretty steady as she goes week overall. Oh, I did a hardcore WoW character that I made with fellow streamer Apoptosis and his cousin Hellscream. And we made dwarves in WoW in the vanilla version, so the initial one. We ended up all dying at the very end of the session, like right before we were about to wrap up, to a bunch of leper gnomes. Because they're really small and hard to spot, and they respawn really quickly. So I think we got overwhelmed, and one of ours died. So we get to remake those characters tomorrow.
Well, best of luck.
Thank you. You can use that.
I thought you were done with WoW.
Yeah, I had been. This is the first like re-venture back into that since maybe 2024 was when I stopped playing.
Uh, so is this hardcore thing like an Iron Man mode type deal?
Yeah, if your character dies, then it's dead forever. And we're doing
Uh,
a run where we have three characters, and if any one of the characters die, then we have to restart. So
gotcha.
that way no one gets left behind.
I could see how that would make things difficult.
Yeah. Gotta play very safe. Well, I don't really know what's happened this week in terms of big news. There hasn't been that much drama, at least what people are talking about. And I didn't see any super catchy headlines, so
Hmm.
I'm pretty open as to what's going on. Chat, feel free to ask if you have a question.
Excuse me. Yeah, the Iran update will be the main thing.
Mm.
But other than that, just miscellaneous stuff. Nothing much in particular. So yeah, we
Mm.
can kind of go and do whatever you like as far as topics. Any preference?
Can we hit a country before we get into the war update?
Yeah, by all means.
How is
Did you have
Brazil
any?
doing?
How's Brazil doing? Um, how is Brazil doing? I haven't heard about them in a while. They've been pretty quiet. I think they're gearing up for elections pretty soon. So I think that's probably one of the bigger items going on. I'm sure there's other stuff going on there, but I just haven't read about it. Again, they've been out of the headlines. There's been more dramatic stuff happening. Yeah, I think Lula da Silva is going to run again. He's the current president. And obviously, Bolsonaro can't run because he's technically in jail, although I think he's under house arrest technically at the moment. But his party, that is running his son in his place. So there actually will be a Bolsonaro on the ticket. It just won't be Jair Bolsonaro. And last I checked, he was doing better than expected in polling. I think Da Silva is still technically in the lead, but the lead has been narrowing over time. So there could
Is this
be
a
another
left versus right or establishment versus populist?
both, actually. In this case, Lula da Silva is definitely very left-wing. And Bolsonaro's party and his son are both very explicitly right-wing. But the Bolsonaros are also very explicitly populist. So populist nationalist right-wing, if you like, running against sort of the avatar of left-wing politics in Brazil, Lula da Silva.
So if anyone wants to see something funny, search YouTube for Bolsonaro doing push-ups. That's a classic. That's the kind of... He made what?
I was going to say, he made quite the impression on you. This is the first time you've mentioned that.
No, it hits close to home for me because I do push-ups on stream and I get critiqued for my push-ups. And while you could always nitpick some aspect of how a person executes them, Bolsonaro does them with like pro athletes and stuff in a way that it seems like no one has ever corrected him or was allowed to do so. He flails about with a lot of overexerted energy, so it's just pretty entertaining. He clearly wants to be kind of part of that whole macho culture and represent athletes and so on, which is cool. Like, it's a cool sentiment. It's just the execution is very funny. And then it turns out that he's a bit of a jackass of a leader, so that only adds a comedic element to it.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much else to add beyond that, though. I think the economy is doing okay. I don't think they've been impacted too negatively by the drama in the Middle East. Their energy supplies are still all right. I think they have had some inflation from it, but it's not as dramatic. They don't depend on oil from the Middle East. Like a lot of countries in Latin America, they kind of source from the hemisphere. I think they have pretty good trade ties with China because of the disruptions with Sino-American trade. That's created opportunities for Brazilian agriculture to export more to China, since they're seen as a safer alternative to American producers.
Do they have a pretty big agricultural sector?
Oh, yeah. They kind of rank up there with the United States in terms of agricultural exports. Soybeans in particular are a major export crop for them, but I think they do other stuff as well. And China's easily their largest overseas market. Yeah, whenever China puts tariffs on American agricultural stuff as a part of a trade flare-up, then Brazil invariably benefits, because generally Chinese buyers just default to them as the alternative.
I hadn't thought of that because the U.S. is, I guess, self-sufficient with their agriculture, so we don't import that much stuff. We get some things from South America because of the hemispheres and stuff, and that way you can always have things in season. But I don't see very many produce items that say from Brazil. But I guess that's because they export to other people.
Yeah, they export to other people, and a lot of stuff that Brazil has a comparative advantage in vis-a-vis the U.S. market are products that other countries in the region that are closer to the United States also have. So we could hypothetically buy more fruit from Brazil, but it's cheaper and faster just to buy it from like Central America. They're just closer, so they tend to get more of the market as opposed to Brazil, which tends to export further abroad. Places like Europe, for example. Yeah, Brazil doesn't really produce a whole lot of produce in the Amazon. The Amazon is more like ranching. So a lot of beef and stuff comes out of the Amazon. A lot of the agricultural produce in Brazil is actually grown instead in what's called the Cerrado, which is a different sort of biome. Very, very different biome from the Amazon. The Amazon is very, very wet, well forested, etc. You know, rainforest. And the Cerrado, by contrast, is pretty dry. It's not intuitively the place that you would expect a whole bunch of Brazilian agriculture to happen in, but they've invested pretty heavily in modern agricultural practices there, you know, phosphates, fertilizers, etc. And so by using technology, they've been able to kind of make it into a very productive agricultural producer. They've got other regions of the country further south that are more natural agricultural producers, and they produce quite a bit, but they generally do more coffee, you know, cash crops like that. It's not so much the soybean crop. The soybean crop, as I understand it, is more produced in the Cerrado. So when Brazil benefits from Sino-American trade disruptions, that disproportionately benefits that particular region of Brazil.
It's a funny aspect of foreign policy in that third parties can benefit from rivalries between someone. There are two countries that are sanctioning each other, then sometimes someone random benefits from this. And sometimes the change could even be break even for the two parties, and it's just a symbolic opposition. And another country could legitimately benefit from that posturing.
Yeah, but that's been very common with the Sino-American trade drama. You know, the tariff hikes have resulted in disruptions to Sino-American trade, but it hasn't really fallen off all that much, actually. You know, probably the biggest impact is tariff evasion. So Chinese producers will sell stuff to buyers in Southeast Asia, and then those Southeast Asian buyers will sell it on to the United States because the U.S. has lower tariffs against Southeast Asia. Alternatively, Chinese producers will just invest in factories in Southeast Asia, and they'll just build stuff there and then export it on to the U.S. But the end goal is the same. You know, they're just getting around the high tariffs on China. And so obviously that whole process has greatly benefited Southeast Asian economies. They've gleaned a fair amount of economic growth from that. The Trump administration tried nominally to tamp that down by hiking tariffs on Southeast Asia. That was part of the whole reciprocal tariff drama in 2025. But the high tariffs didn't really last. He eventually lowered them. And so at this point, there's been some disruption from the tariff hikes on Southeast Asia, but not really enough to fully dislodge the Chinese tariff evasion trade. The re-export market, as I've called it in the past. So that's still going relatively strong, last I checked. I guess you could say another example would be Central Asia. One of the things that happened after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022 is that a lot of Europe sanctioned Russia in order to punish them and basically cut off normal flows of trade. And so the result then is that a lot of Russian goods that had been exported to Europe ended up being rerouted through Central Asia to get around the sanctions. And in turn, a lot of stuff that Europe previously sold to Russia but couldn't anymore because of sanctions ended up getting routed through Central Asia on its way to Russia. So Central Asia correspondingly has benefited a fair amount from becoming a kind of tariff evasion intraput. Turkey fills a similar role. Central Asia has benefited, especially Kazakhstan, but Turkey also has kind of become an intraput in this way. So lots of unintended consequences here from sanctions and tariffs and whatnot.
That makes sense. Chad's asking, was the tariff refund talked about last week?
No, I didn't talk about it. I don't really have much to say about it. Nominally, because the Supreme Court shot down last year's tariffs, all of the firms that had to pay tariffs to the US government are entitled to get that money back. And so the Trump administration has set up a kind of online portal through which you can apply for that if you were so afflicted. And there's some question about, how serious they'll be about it, how long it'll take to get the refunds out, how expensive the total refunds will end up being. Obviously, if they refunded everybody, it'll be hundreds of billions of dollars, but it's not clear that everybody will go to the trouble of going, through the application process, since that'll probably take some time and it'll be probably somewhat complicated. I'm sure the bigger firms that had to pay out will go through the process regardless of how complicated it is, but probably some smaller producers, certainly a lot of individuals that were affected, will probably not bother. So the total amount refunded will probably be less than the total amount of tariffs that were gathered between the time they were implemented and the Supreme Court shooting them down. I think I did read that some analysts were surprised how quickly the Trump administration moved forward with setting up an application process. There had kind of been an assumption that they would drag their feet, but apparently they haven't. But yeah, I don't have much else to say about it. I don't know if they'll actually take it seriously or not. If they do, then there probably will be a fair amount of money refunded in relatively short order. But in short order, in a bureaucracy, generally means a couple of months at least. So it'll probably play out over a relatively long period of time. I don't think it'll bust the budget. They'll probably be able to manage fine. And they've still got tariffs in place. They just replaced the ones the Supreme Court shot down with some other ones.
So would you say that this whole tariff mini game that we've had of increasing tariffs on countries to play back at them has resulted in inconveniencing ourselves without doing much to them?
It's inconvenienced everybody, ourselves, the world. Like it has not been a productive policy. The Trump administration has come up with a myriad of excuses and rationalizations for doing it, but none of them really hold water. There have not been any discernible gains from this tariff adventure. Oh, is there another place you wanted to get to?
Chat mentioned Indonesia and Thailand.
Indonesia and Thailand. Don't think I've read about anything big going on in those places. Yeah, Thailand had the border drama for a while, but that's kind of tamped down. I think they actually still have troops in Cambodia, technically. But they're not deep into Cambodia. It's more like just across the border. So that's been quiet. I don't think there's been any new political drama. I think what was it? Oh, I forgot the party's name. They had that new party win power in the recent election. I can't ever remember their name because they're so new. Or at least they're a new player in terms of being like a major power broker. I know that The billionaire telecom guy is kind of on the outs. Whatever concord he had with the conservative parties has effectively fallen apart at this point. So that coalition is more or less dead in the water. The reformist party is kind of disappointed, to put it mildly, with the recent election. They're still around, they're still hanging in there, but it's not really clear where the political winds are going to take them in the near term. Right now, the conservatives are definitely in the driver's seat.
Is Thailand the country that has the kind of crazy party monarch right now?
Thailand, yeah. Yeah, he's been fairly quiet. He hasn't really gone out of his way to party since he became king. He's been relatively well behaved. But before that, yeah, he was a playboy who just hung out in Europe. You can Google some of the tabloid pictures of him from before he became king, and you can see very clearly that he was not really meant to be king. He's not king material. I'm sure the army appreciates him. The army probably has him wrapped around their finger. Yeah, there was serious talk after his father died of changing the rules so that one of his daughters could inherit the position from him and become queen. But the army didn't like that, unsurprisingly. His daughters were relatively well respected and regarded in Thailand, but they were also probably more independent thinking. His son, by contrast, does not seem quite so independent thinking. So if you're a large institution that's looking to manipulate the monarchy for your benefit, that's the kind of guy you want. You want the party guy. The party guy doesn't ask a lot of questions. He's just happy to be there.
Yeah, he's not really self-motivated to his own strategic outcomes. As long as he gets what makes him happy, then you can steer him.
Yeah. God, what was it? It's been a while since he, what's the word? Since he became king.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a brief scandal for a while, I think in the first year or two, because he had like a consort, not his wife, but like a mistress.
Mm-hmm.
And the mistress had a dog that they made a general in the Thai Air Force.
Oh.
Something weird like that.
They didn't let the dog actually operate a vehicle, did they?
I don't think so. I don't know how the mechanics of that would work.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, he did weird shit the first year. I think his consort also was given a rank in the military, and there's even pictures of her in uniform. Just strange shit. I haven't heard anything like that since the first year, though. So I think the army kind of either talked him into behaving or is doing a better job of covering up the shenanigans. But yeah, as for Indonesia, I've heard even less about Indonesia recently than about Thailand. I don't think they have an election coming up. I think they've still got, what was his name, Prabowo as president. I think the last thing I remember reading about Indonesia was what was it? It was some drama about military officers being in the government. I think Prabowo had some kind of like military boot camp. He wanted his cabinet members to go on. Some weird nonsense like that. I think I did read recently about Indonesia's nickel industry doing pretty well, which kind of surprised me. They'd been a big exporter of raw nickel for a long time, but one of the things the government did like 10 years ago or so was that they really pushed hard to incentivize, actually not even incentivize, they pressured nickel companies into setting up nickel refineries in Indonesia. Because the way it worked before is that Indonesia exported the raw material, the raw nickel, to refineries in other countries, and they were refined into basically refined nickel products of one kind or another, and then exported at a higher value. So the Indonesian government figured that given how large a chunk of the global nickel market they produce, that they could successfully pressure those companies into building up refinery capacity within Indonesia itself, so that Indonesia could enjoy some of the higher value from refined nickel exports rather than just the raw nickel exports. And I was pretty skeptical of it at the time. Developing countries don't have great track records of pushing around multinational corporations like that. And generally the projects they end up with don't work out too well. But to my surprise, this one actually did work out. And, the nickel industry actually did build refineries in Indonesia, and they actually did end up becoming competitive. And so Indonesia actually does export a pretty good amount of refined nickel material now. So a rare success story in industrial policy.
Love to see it.
Have you ever seen The Killing Fields?
No.
Wait, I might be mixing up the name. Oh, yeah, I messed up the name. I'm thinking of a documentary called The Act of Killing. There we go. It's about former members of Indonesian death squads in the 1960s. It's supposed to be a pretty interesting and insightful review of that particular period of Indonesia's history. I still haven't seen it. It's been on my watch list for years. But whenever I end up thinking about or talking about Indonesia, I'm always reminded of it.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Was there any particular reason they asked about Thailand and Indonesia? Am I missing something?
Oh, no, chat just mentioned that they visited those countries and that it was nice.
Oh, cool. Yeah, Thailand in particular has a very strong tourism industry. And it's not all just, sex tourism either. There actually is a pretty good amount to do there. Beautiful country.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky enough to actually stay in the, what do they call it? Like the old quarter of Bangkok, where all sort of the touristy temples are and whatnot. Mm-hmm. There's actually a restaurant. No, there's a hotel that is a former restaurant that was embedded there. So I was in easy walking distance of everything. It's pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, Thai architecture is cool. Their food is amazing.
Oh, God, yeah. Very affordable, too. Fantastic stuff. Very much got a taste for Thai milk tea while I was there.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't really been able to find a good equivalent to it here in the U.S.
Thai coffee is good, too.
I don't think I've had that. Didn't even know they grew it.
It's quite nice.
Yeah, I don't really think of Indonesia much when I think of tourism. I guess there's Bali. Bali is very much known for tourism, but like broader Indonesia, not so much. I guess did the poster in question, the chatter in question, visit Bali, or was there some other part of Indonesia they went to? I think the rest of Indonesia would be more interesting because it's less touristy. I think there's more stuff there off the beaten track, so to speak. Indonesia just very rarely gets talked about in general.
Mm-hmm.
I actually knew a guy back when I was in grad school. We worked in the same lab together. He went on a trip to Indonesia as part of a basically experiment. They had funding to go and do surveys and stuff out there. And so he went there as part of the team, and he ended up meeting a girl that he ended up marrying. Yeah, came back, and then eventually quit his job and moved out to Indonesia permanently.
Okay.
I guess he might have come back since then, but as far as I know, he's still there. You ever heard of Jakarta?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mega city, very big. It's also sinking. lots of problems with flooding on account of the city sinking. That's one of the reasons they decided to build a new capital over in Borneo. But yeah, Jakarta has a lot of history, and it's huge. Probably one of the more, I guess, just like the country as a whole, it's an undersung megacity. You'll hear about Mexico City or Mumbai or places like that, but Jakarta rarely gets a mention.
How's South Korea doing?
Interesting question. South Korea is kind of in a weird place right now because they had the guy that tried to launch a auto gulp, a self coup, a year or two back. Mm-hmm. So then they impeached him, and those proceedings are ongoing. Well, not the proceedings about the impeachment; he's been removed, but they've got an ongoing case about his coup attempt. So the center left got back into power, and they've been kind of trying to keep a lid on things. There's a lot of partisanship in South Korean politics. So they're navigating that. They're trying to navigate the Trump administration because obviously all the tariff stuff has been disruptive to the South Korean economy. And because the left is in power again in South Korea, they're also trying to kind of be more accommodating to Beijing. You know, the left in South Korea is known for being more dovish on both North Korea and China. So they're not abandoning the relationship with the United States, but they are trying to kind of balance the relationship with the U.S. more with the relationship with China, so that they're just less overtly dependent on the United States. So that's a lot of plates to have to spin at once for any government. Mm-hmm. But thus far, I think they've been managing it more or less. But beyond that, I haven't heard of anything new out of South Korea.
We did get a question as well.
Let's take a look. That. What is the current state and performance of the new Syrian government? Is the new offer for the Kurds to integrate with the Syrian state in good intentions? So the new government is doing okay overall. They came in saying that they were going to try to create an inclusive society, a representative government, that there would be human rights, et cetera. And, the record's been kind of mixed since then. They've been in power, like a year and change or however long. And in that time, they have tried to build a new state that kind of ticks all those boxes, but it's still so early that there's still a long way to go. So, for example, they haven't really had an actual democratic election yet, because they haven't really yet built the institutional architecture with which to actually hold an election. They technically have had an election, but it was not like fully democratic. It was sort of this weird half election where the ruling party and its allies kind of nominated people, and then they were voted on within the party, and those people then went on to upper levels in the nascent legislature that they created. So that's not really a fully democratic system. That's almost more like what Hong Kong has, where special interests kind of vote on candidates. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of a half measure to try to move in the right direction, but while still kind of retaining enough authority within the hands of the new establishment that they don't have like a lot of disruptions from dissidents and whatnot. As far as like minorities and stuff, again, it's kind of a mixed bag. They've sent all the right signals as far as like rhetoric and whatnot that they want to include them. But at the same time, like the new government is so weak still that they have a limited ability to monopolize violence in the country. And there have been malefactors, both from within the government and without the government, whom have abused some minorities. Probably the Alawites have come under the brunt of it in the northwestern part of the country, mostly because they were known to be backers of the Assad regime. There hasn't been outright genocide like a lot of people were predicting. So the worst predictions have not come to pass, that there would just be widespread violent retaliation. But there has been some violent retaliation. It hasn't been zero. There's also been drama with the Druze. They're like this sort of Muslim splinter type group. They're kind of hard to classify. They say they're Muslims. A lot of mainline Muslim clerics say that they're definitely not. So it depends on you. They're kind of like Muslim Mormons almost.
They're the mystics.
Yeah, kind of like that. Again, it's kind of difficult to classify exactly. But they've kind of come under special attention. There have been clashes between Druze militias and state authorities of one kind or another. Some of the state authorities in question have been more paramilitary than state in question. But that again just speaks to sort of the semi-chaotic nature of a revolutionary state and revolutionary environment. The bigger issue is that the Israelis, whether or not they're telling the truth on this is kind of down to individual interpretation, but the Israelis say that they want to protect the Druze community in Syria. And so they've actually occasionally launched airstrikes on military targets in Syria in retaliation for alleged abuses that have been perpetrated against the Druze community by the new government. And critics have noted that there's some self-interest at play here, because the Israelis are not just doing that for humanitarian reasons. They're probably trying to set up some kind of proxy force in the country that they can use as leverage against the state. And mind you, they're also setting up a buffer zone in southern Syria. This is beyond just the Golan Heights, which nominally is itself supposed to be a buffer zone. So they're trying to set up a kind of buffer demilitarized zone in southern Syria. And it's probable that the Druze stuff is kind of part of that. And maybe that they want to set up some kind of local force that it can help them enforce the demilitarized zone in southern Syria. So Israel nominally is engaging in some degree of humanitarian intervention there, but probably it's just a mask to try to take advantage of the chaotic situation in Syria to put any future Syrian government at a disadvantage, militarily speaking. So whether or not you count that as a genuine example of the Syrian government abusing the Druze minority, or a foreign government exploiting concerns within the Druze community about the new government for its own advantage, that's down to interpretation. It's probably the latter, given Israel's history, but it's debatable. Because there have been, again, violence. There have been examples of violence perpetrated against the Druze community, so that it's not entirely like a fake problem. It's just being probably exacerbated artificially. And then there's the Kurds, as requested. So, yeah, the American government, as we've discussed before, fucked over the Kurds by just kind of withdrawing without any kind of concrete agreement. Promise from the new Syrian government to actually refrain from abusing the Kurds. But at the same time, the new government hasn't really seemed to go out of its way since then to abuse the Kurdish population. So it's possible that they've been honest when they've made promises to the Kurds about giving their language some special status and giving them some degree of autonomy. But they have taken a harder line in terms of military affairs. So like Kurdish militias have basically been ordered to integrate into the army. The new government isn't messing around with that. So they don't want the Kurds to retain any kind of independent militia or paramilitary force. So political autonomy, yes. Military autonomy, no. Seems to be the approach Damascus is taking there. That process is still pretty nascent, so it's unclear how it'll work out. I don't think the Kurdish militias have disarmed and integrated yet. And Damascus has not really moved to force the issue as of yet. So there could yet be fireworks on that front. That remains to be determined. But for now, anyway, Damascus is kind of behaving itself in trying to resolve differences with the Kurds diplomatically and via negotiation. Yeah, so overall, the state of the new government is, I would say, in flux. I don't think you can really draw concrete long-term inferences yet, conclusions yet. about just what they're going to do with minorities and whether or not they're actually going to follow through on promises vis-a-vis democratization and whatnot. So too early to say overall. Nominally, they're doing okay, but there have been problems. I think part of the reason they've been as well behaved as they have been is because they want to get sanctions lifted. Some sanctions have been lifted already, but they would prefer like full normalization. If they want to get that, they're going to have to look good in the news, basically. There can't really be any big drama. So I'm sure that's acting as a disciplining factor for them. I think they still have Turkish backing too. That might be a factor as well. Turkish influence has sometimes been oversold. So has been argued by some analysts. So it's not necessarily the case that they're behaving well on the orders of the Turkish government, but I'm sure wanting to cultivate a positive relationship with Ankara is contributing to good behavior. I think I did read something about an anti-corruption drive in the new government as well. So they're making some steps in that direction as also, but
How corrupt was Syria before?
oh god, it was pretty bad, especially on account of very high, especially during the civil war. You know, the Assad regime basically depended on corrupt relationships with various actors in the military and within the civil government in order to maintain itself. You know, it was almost a feudal arrangement. You would give one guy in the military de facto warlord status where they could kind of exploit the resources in their area of responsibility however they wanted. And that was how they kind of made their money. That was done in exchange for loyalty. And there were similar arrangements made with civilian actors within the Assad government. I think there was one high-ranking guy who was basically the telecoms billionaire. You know, he had control over a disproportionate share of the telecoms industry in the country. And that was granted to him in exchange for de facto loyalty. He had to give the government a cut of the profits and whatnot. But otherwise, he was kind of free to just own it and run it how he wanted. I think there was eventually a falling out there, and a lot of those assets were taken from him. But that was how the arrangement worked. You know, we'll give you control of assets or territory just so long as you promise to be loyal to Assad. So an immense amount of corruption resulted. Since the Assad government fell, there have still been issues with corruption, as we've talked about before. Like, corruption is kind of a cultural issue. Well, not cultural per se, but it's an issue with political culture. You know, the culture within states and other institutions of government kind of propagates itself over time and can be difficult to dislodge, even if you change a state or the leaders of a state or what have you. You know, customary culture is hard to remove. And there was a lot of that in Syria that the new government has been trying to deal with. Mixed results thus far, but it's a positive sign that they at least recognize it's an issue and are trying to tackle it. As for whether or not the government is telling the truth about allowing the Kurds to integrate with the new state with some special privileges, I guess, like I said with the other stuff, it's too early to say. They haven't really made bold moves there as of yet. For now, they're just negotiating with them, which I guess itself could be considered a positive sign. They could try to use violence to resolve the differences there, but thus far they've been negotiating instead of fighting. So in so much as that's a good sign, you could say that yes, they are arguing and negotiating in good faith. But it could be they're just biding their time, building up their forces for a potential future showdown. We won't really know until later.
I see. Well, I'm down to dig into Iran whenever it seems like a reasonable time.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, relatively quiet week for Iran. Not a whole lot of drama, or at least not as much compared to earlier weeks anyway. Well, I guess to start with Iran, there's the peace talks. The Pakistani government announced that a new round of talks will begin soon. So apparently that's in the cards. We'll see if it actually happens in practice. It could be that this is just word of mouth from negotiators and a part of some broader maneuvering or posturing between the two counterparties. But nominally, at least, there is a promise coming from the mediator of the talks that peace talks will resume. Keep in mind, the peace talks are separate from the ceasefire talks. The ceasefire remains in place and has been mostly observed. And there have been separate talks about extending them. But those are different than the peace talks. The peace talks were meant to be a part of the ceasefire. And they did have the ceasefire talks last weekend, but they didn't go anywhere. And so they were shut down. So there's been some question about where things go from here. So this announcement from the Pakistani government is the first new evidence that peace talks could resume, or at least there could be a second round of peace talks. Let's see, as far as the nuclear issue being negotiated as part of potential peace talks, the Iranian government is signaling that there could be room for compromise there. They're suggesting that they could be willing to send all of its highly enriched uranium abroad. Before, they were only willing to ship part of it abroad, and they were very picky about just who they were sending it to. So this is the first signal here that there may be room to negotiate on that count. As far as the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranian government signaled in the past week that they would be open to partially opening the Strait of Hormuz as part of a final peace agreement. However, they wanted significant concessions for that. But the fact that they're open to it suggests that their previously stated position that they wanted full control of the strait maybe is not hard and fast. They may be willing to give ground on that. And then posturing. So on the US side, Trump started threatening strikes again if Iran doesn't reach a deal with him. And the Iranian government announced that it had not agreed to participate in another round of negotiations with the United States due to, quote unquote, excessive US demands. So not a lot of good feeling there in the respective positions. But this is exactly the kind of rhetoric that preceded the announcement of the ceasefire last week. So this could just be how Washington and Tehran talk to each other. It may be a little difficult to interpret much into it beyond that. Let's see. So the other big news in the past week, and this was the past couple of days, is that a ceasefire was announced in Lebanon. Israel and Hezbollah have been fighting each other, mostly Israel attacking them in retaliation for rocket attacks on Israel. And there have been some debate about whether or not the ceasefire now with Iran encompassed Hezbollah and Lebanon. The Israelis argued it did not. Trump apparently thought that it did at first, but then was talked into adopting the Israeli position. And the Iranians were upset about that, refused to open the Strait of Hormuz on account of it. And so there's been some back and forth about it. So in the past couple of days, there was a ceasefire announced that covered Lebanon. And Trump apparently was very particular about announcing on Truth Social that the Israelis were, quote unquote, prohibited from attacking Lebanon. So kind of going out of his way there to assert that Israel needed to observe the ceasefire. I don't know if he was doing that for theatrical reasons or if he felt it was necessary because the Netanyahu government really, really wanted to attack Hezbollah, regardless of the ceasefire talks with Iran. So I guess we'll find out in time. But for now, at least,
I heard from family was that there was rumors of Christian communities being killed in the Israeli and American strikes on Lebanon, which upset the Christian base, which is a big part of his voting bloc. So that would be a way to cover that kind of rumor?
Kind of. It's a little more complicated than that. Where do I start with this? So Lebanon does have a sizable Christian community, but in general, between Lebanon's Christian community and the Israeli Zionist community in Israel and abroad, it's the latter that has more influence in the United States and more pull with the Republican Party. So yes, Israel has, generally accidentally, as I understand it, killed some Christians in Lebanon. But if it comes to choosing between Lebanese Christians and the Israelis, generally evangelical Christians in the United States have sided with the Israelis. So I don't know that the killing of Christians in this way is too big a deal as far as swaying the Trump administration. Because it's happened in the past and nothing of substance came of it. However, the fact that Christians have been killed is still relevant, just not necessarily for reasons relating to the American Christian polity. It has to do with the fact that the president of Lebanon right now is a guy named, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name actually, Joseph Aoun. I must be butchering that. Aoun is my best guess here. So Aoun is a Christian, and he leads a Christian party. And so, of course, in Lebanon, there's a lot of sectarian, identitarian type politics. Parties generally have a sectarian affiliation of some kind. So Aoun's party is of a Christian affiliation. However, his party is not the only Christian party. It's certainly not the biggest. And more interestingly, he's actually allied with Hezbollah.
What?
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, right? Aoun has long been the main Christian ally of Hezbollah within the context of Lebanese politics. This is not new. He's basically a power broker within his particular subset of the Christian community there. Most Christians follow other parties that are definitely not aligned with Hezbollah. Generally, they were on very different sides of the Lebanese civil war. But Aoun was one of the guys during the civil war, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, who did not side with the anti-Hezbollah Christians. He kind of comprised his own one-man pro-Hezbollah Christian faction. And that's an alliance that has stood the test of time ever since. So Aoun, even though he's Christian, still technically represents an example of Hezbollah influence. And the fact that they basically installed him into the presidency is an example of that.
Intriguing.
Yeah. So it's a little complicated. So yes, Christians did die, and Lebanon's Christian president, I'm sure, was off-put by that. But he is technically a Hezbollah ally as well, as I understand it. And I'm sure, well, the thing I have in my notes here is that the ceasefire was a result of a phone call between President Aoun and Donald Trump. So apparently Aoun lobbied Donald Trump himself. Wow. And there have been intermittent efforts at mediation by the U.S. government to try to shepherd Lebanon and Israel into a ceasefire over the past couple weeks. But it may be that Aoun's phone call to Donald Trump is what finally allowed for a breakthrough. And it's possible.
A successful persuasion check.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. And it could be that one of the things that he used to kind of break through is to cite the killings of some Christians in Lebanon. I'm sure there was a multitude of things discussed, among them that, Lebanese broadly don't like getting bombed by Israel, that there wouldn't be any progress on a ceasefire or a deal with Iran unless there was a ceasefire covering Lebanon. But it could be that he played the Christian card too, and it may be that had some impact on Trump personally. But as far as I know, there hasn't been any pressure on Trump from the Christian community or Christian political actors within the United States to push a ceasefire on Israel. Doesn't mean there wasn't one, just means that I haven't heard about one. I'm not aware of any. So my understanding is that Lebanon's pro-Hezbollah Christian president is largely responsible for the ceasefire.
What would be the reasons why this president would say that they support Hezbollah? Because aren't they seen as a terrorist organization by most of the world?
They were aligned during the Civil War.
Oh.
Back in the 70s. They fought together.
Against who?
The Lebanese Civil War was messy. Everybody kind of fought against everyone else at one time or another. It was a long-ass conflict. In the case of Aoun's party, I think they fought against the Phalange, which is like one of the big Christian militias, and then against the Israelis. Although I don't know how much they fought against the Israelis. That was more Hezbollah's thing in the south of Lebanon. Yeah, probably they fought a bunch against. They also fought against a bunch of localized warlords and whatnot. I can't even begin to tell you all of the different groups that fought in the Lebanese Civil War. Very bad conflict. You know, Lebanese society basically melted down for like 15 years.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a useful relationship for both parties, even though they kind of have counterintuitive, opposing perspectives. You know, from Hezbollah's perspective, it's useful to have a Christian ally because he can help fracture the Christian vote, so to speak. You know, otherwise, the Christians would be a united bloc and they would have relatively more leverage to apply against Hezbollah's interests in Lebanese politics. So Aoun helps kind of break up that potential unity and weaken it to a degree. And then from Aoun's perspective, he gets a powerful backer. Hezbollah is the most powerful military force in Lebanon, a major political force, a major social force even. They have a number of social programs that they operate independent of the government. So that's a powerful actor to have in your corner in Lebanon. And so I'm sure Aoun benefits from that, much more so than if he tried to join some kind of broader Christian coalition. He would probably be a junior partner in that coalition. But as a Hezbollah partner, he gets special attention, special resources. Let's see, as far as the ceasefire, Trump elaborated a little bit after the announcement. Prohibiting Israel from breaking the ceasefire, and then also explicitly stating that the Lebanon ceasefire is not linked to negotiations with Iran. I think he's doing that because he doesn't want to allow Iran to use it as a point of leverage, but that's also pointless since it's already done. This is a win for Iran. They wanted a ceasefire, the ceasefire with that had been agreed to with Iran to encompass Lebanon. So you can think of this as a de facto concession by Washington. But Trump himself doesn't seem to want to admit that. He doesn't like the idea, I guess, of being seen to make a concession. So whether he's doing that to posture for domestic political reasons so that it can't be said that he's making concessions, or if he's doing it as part of posturing within the negotiation with Iran, I don't really know. That's not clear. But it's notable that he made this statement. It kind of signals that the ceasefire may not last. The ceasefire could be treated as something separate, and correspondingly, the ceasefire could end before negotiations with Iran end in any kind of successful agreement. So we'll see who's telling the truth here on this. You know, if he does break the ceasefire with Hezbollah here, before there's an agreement with Iran, Iran could walk away from the peace talks. So we'll see how it all plays out. Let's see, Strait of Hormuz. So the US blockade is ongoing. It was actually implemented, I think, this past Monday. And for the first day or two, there were some issues. There were ships getting through that technically were not allowed to get through according to the criteria that the US government had announced. But after the first 2 days, they eventually did lock it down. And as far as I know, No new ships have gotten through that were not supposed to. The U.S. government, actually technically the U.S. military, announced that ships bound for Iran not only were not allowed to go through the Strait of Hormuz, but if they tried, the U.S. Navy reserved the right to board those vessels and inspect their cargo for contraband. And there's a list of contraband items that they're looking for: weapons, weapon systems, ammunition, nuclear materials, crude and refined oil products, iron, steel, aluminum. So any cargo ship that is technically headed for Iran that is carrying that stuff could see their cargo seized by the U.S. Navy.
Iron and steel and stuff, those are contraband because you make weapons out of them?
Correct.
I see.
That's the idea.
Couldn't they also be used for swords or something?
True, but I don't think the U.S. military is too worried about swords.
Not yet.
In fact, they would probably prefer any steel that makes its way to Iran to be used to make swords. That would probably be less threatening than using them to make missiles or drones or what have you. But yeah, that's a belligerent move by the U.S. military. It's one thing to announce a blockade and to prevent ships from passing. It's another thing, much more intrusive, to board a vessel against the will of its owner and to inspect cargo and to seize that cargo if it meets some arbitrary criteria. Mind you, none of this is especially legal, strictly speaking. Like a blockade is of dubious legality. You know, it kind of depends on emergency provisions, wars, that kind of thing. But inspecting third-party vessels, that gets into more fraught territory. Nobody can do anything about it because nobody else can really stop the U.S. Navy from doing it, but I'm sure it'll raise a few hackles. Let's see. So regarding, well, I guess this isn't the Strait of Hormuz. This is the Red Sea, but it involves freedom of navigation in the U.S. Navy, so I'm kind of grouping them together. So the U.S. Navy is kind of exhibiting some caution vis-a-vis the Red Sea. There's actually a carrier battle group that's circumnavigating the Red Sea by going around the Cape of Good Hope. What I read is that, yeah, it's a much longer trip. So what I read is that the USS George H.W. Bush aircraft carrier is off the coast of Namibia right now because it's going around the Cape of Good Hope to get to the Middle East. So it's notable that they're doing that instead of just going through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea. So that suggests the U.S. Navy is worried about the Houthis over in Yemen and any potential attacks that they might launch if they try to traverse the Red Sea right now. However, there's another carrier, what was it? The Gerald Ford, that did recently go through the Suez Canal and is in the Red Sea. It's not clear if it's actually traversed it yet, but it is in the Red Sea at this point, it seems. So some mixed signals there from the U.S. end. Okay, so the recent drama in the past couple days regarding the Strait of Hormuz has been that the strait was reopened by the Iranian government and then reclosed by the Iranian government. So, like I mentioned earlier, the Iranian government had been demanding that their ceasefire with the United States and Israel encompass Lebanon. And when it was apparent that Israel was going to continue attacking Hezbollah anyway, the Iranian government announced that they would not open the Strait of Hormuz, as had been promised as part of the original ceasefire deal with the Trump administration. And so there was some drama about that. And when the Lebanese ceasefire was announced in the past week, the Iranian government in turn announced that accordingly, they would honor their part of the ceasefire deal and open the Strait of Hormuz to traffic. That was done with some caveats. You know, they said that while they would reopen it, they retained the right to inspect the cargo of ships moving through the strait. They said that the strait would be closed to warships, and they said that any ships that crossed would only be able to do so with explicit IRGC permission. So not a full opening of the strait as they had originally said, but technically they were nominally honoring the agreement by opening it. However, the U.S. blockade was another matter. The Iranian government argued after they nominally reopened the strait that the U.S. blockade itself violated the terms of the original ceasefire agreement. And so, correspondingly, they have now shut down the Strait of Hormuz again, this time in retaliation for the ongoing U.S. blockade. Enforcing that, they actually did attack some cargo ships with some Iranian surface vessels. To my surprise, I didn't think the Iranian Navy had any surface vessels left. But apparently they did, because 2 of them went out and fired upon a tanker that was trying to traverse the Strait of Hormuz. So the strait is now closed again, apparently. So some hewing and hawing back and forth between Iran and the United States over the Strait of Hormuz, but the result of the week's drama is that it is closed again.
I see.
So I found some interesting news on politics within Iran. There was one outlet, this is the Institute for the Study of War, ISW. They argue here that Iran closing the strait again suggests that the IRGC and a particular commander, a Major General Ahmad Vahidi, and certain members of his network are taking control of the Iranian negotiations with the United States and Israel. Apparently, the announcement that the strait would be opened in response to the ceasefire deal encompassing Lebanon was something that the civilian leadership within the Iranian government did, independent of the IRGC. And the fact that the opening of the strait was subsequently reversed is, by this argumentation, an evidence that the civilian leadership's hold on power is weakening, and that the IRGC is taking on more of an authoritative role within the negotiations than they had previously. So that suggests that the Iranian positions in the negotiation going forward could become less flexible, and the negotiators may end up taking a harder line in response to pressure from the IRGC. That also does suggest that there may be a more dovish faction in the civilian part of the government that would be more willing to make concessions, but it's not clear that they really matter if they can be overruled and overridden by the IRGC this easily. Let's see, an update on a potential ground incursion. So the Wall Street Journal, rather, was reporting that Trump has actually personally been pretty resistant to a ground incursion. So I thought this was pretty notable, if true. Apparently, he's concerned about potential for casualties. I don't think there's any doubt that the island could be taken, but the concern apparently is casualties making it into the news. So that does suggest risk aversion there on the part of the president and his administration that will probably manifest as an unwillingness to launch any kind of significant ground incursion into Iran. Let's see, economic impact. So I have another item here to add to the list of industries that have been disrupted by the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. So this one is sulfur. Apparently, the Middle East is a major producer of sulfur. What I have in my notes here is that the Middle East accounts for half of the entire globe's production of sulfur. No, not production, exports. Sorry, my mistake. The Middle East accounts for about half of all global sulfur exports. There we go. Some of their biggest buyers are places like China, India, Indonesia, and the US. So, the biggest buyers, as you might expect. I thought this was an interesting side note here. China is apparently both a leading importer as well as a major producer. So they produce a lot, but it's still not enough for all of their demand. So they end up importing a lot as well. That's actually how it works with Chinese agriculture. This may surprise some people, but China is actually the world's largest producer of agricultural output. Technically, they're number one. But their population is so big that they can't produce enough to meet all of their demands, so they end up having to import a lot, which is why they're also a leading importer of agricultural goods. So similar logic here with sulfur, apparently. Let's see. And we're actually about done here. So as far as the international element at play with the Iran conflict, the GCC is actually coming under pressure from the Department of Treasury in the United States. They're trying to basically tighten sanctions. They wrote some letters to some of the big financial actors in places like the UAE and Oman, asking them to take action to cut ties with Iran. There had been a kind of détente between Iran and GCC nations before the current conflict. It was kind of a grudging détente, but there had been some movement towards normalization in some areas. And the result is that there had been some resumption of economic ties between Iran and certain GCC nations. And as part of the fallout of the current conflict, there seems to be an effort by Washington to try to reverse that détente and to undo some of those economic ties that have been restored. Let's see. China made a call for quote unquote unimpeded freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. Nominally, that could be targeted at the United States in response to the blockade, but you could also see it as implicit pressure on the Iranian government. Because you'll note that the statement did not include any kind of caveat that the United States was solely responsible for the Strait of Hormuz being closed and that the US needed to make what concessions were necessary to reopen it. It's a pretty bland statement that could be applied both to the United States and or Iran. And certainly China does want the Strait open. They get a good chunk of energy through it. Not all of it from Iran necessarily, but just in general from sources within the Persian Gulf. They buy a lot of stuff. So I suspect Beijing is kind of applying pressure here to both parties to the conflict. But it's also a fairly unambitious statement that's not likely to resonate much. So I think this is in keeping with the risk-averse style of Chinese foreign policy that has been the norm for most of the past couple decades, Wolf Warrior period notwithstanding. And then as far as Russia, the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, said that the U.S. will not be renewing waivers for Iranian and Russian oil. No surprise on Iranian oil. That kind of fits with the imposition of the blockade, but they could have extended the exemption for Russian oil, but apparently they are not going to do that, allegedly. We'll see if they follow through. But that's it for the Iran update. Relatively short today.
Damn. You won't eat up all the weeks then.
Well, I count it as a positive because on account of the ceasefire being observed by Israel, the United States, and Iran, people are not getting blown up. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think Tehran and Washington would not really admit to it, but there probably are negotiations happening that are moving them towards a resolution of the conflict. They will signal otherwise, I'm sure, in order to try to improve their negotiating positions. But like I said last week, if the 2-week ceasefire that we're currently in is extended for another 2 weeks, then I'll take that as a signal that the conflict is de facto over and that they're just trying to find some face-saving agreement that can make everybody walk away looking decent. But we'll see. It could be yet the case that the conflict resumes. As has been pointed out in media, the positions of Washington and Tehran are very, very far apart in the negotiation. So we'll see what happens.
I think we did get some more questions too.
Okay. Let's see. We did the Syria thing. Are you excited for the new era of closing and opening various geographical choke points to manipulate commodity markets. It's great we have such mature and thoughtful leadership.
Is that sarcasm?
I suspect sarcasm at play, yeah. Well, to be fair, I don't think it's exclusively down to manipulating markets. I'm sure there are people in the administration doing that. There's some evidence to that effect. But I think the Trump administration, certainly Trump himself, is making a genuine effort here to negotiate the conflict's resolution. I think that Trump, though, is just kind of bad at war, so to speak. It's really not his thing. And I think if he were being honest, he himself would admit that. He's implicitly admitted it by being pretty gun-shy about conflicts unless he's convinced they will be short-term and easy. I think that was sort of the fatal mistake with the Iranian adventure. He convinced himself or somebody else convinced him that it would be easy and quick. And I think if not for that, then he would never have done it. I maintain that risk aversion is sort of the main defining characteristic of Trump's approach to violent conflict. So I don't think that he's lying when he says he wants to get this over with. I think he is genuinely interested in trying to bring this to as quick a resolution as possible, but he's struggling with it because it's really not his forte. You know, his thing is more economic deals, that side of things is more what he feels himself is his bread and butter. I don't think he's especially good at that either, but I think relatively speaking, he's better at that than he is at dealing with violent conflict. Because when you're dealing with violent conflict, you're dealing with parties that are invested in the negotiation and its outcome much, much more so than people negotiating economic issues. Because a lot of time, economic issues are kind of more transactional in the first place. And that's more suitable to Trump's perspective and style. It's still not great, but he thrives more in that environment where he has a counterparty that is generally willing to make concessions in exchange for some kind of big picture outcome that they see as beneficial. But when you're dealing with hardline nationalists of one kind or another, like with the IRGC, there's much less room for concessions. You know, generally the perspective of the counterparty in negotiations like that is much starker, much more Manichean. You know, issues of sovereignty also generally are at play, and that's much, much more sensitive an issue than this, that, or the other economic issue. So it makes it much, much harder to reach compromise in negotiations involving violent conflict, and I don't think Trump has really shown to be very good at navigating those kinds of negotiations. So I'm sure he's kind of twisting in the wind a little bit right now. If he had bothered to try to maintain the apparatus of diplomacy in the U.S. government, you know, the State Department, he might be able to tap them to help him out, but he's famously mistrusting of the government institutions like that. And even if he changed his mind about trusting them, he hollowed them out pretty thoroughly in 2025. So he doesn't really have a lot of alternatives to his own personal network, you know, his son-in-law and his real estate buddy. And that's not a great roster to have in negotiations like this. That's not the A-team. You know, some former Obama administration officials have pointed out that they had something like 200 dudes involved in the Iran nuclear negotiation. You know, experts of one kind or another, State Department veterans, political insiders. Like, it was a big effort. And that doesn't even include all the people from other governments that were involved in the negotiation. It was meant to be a multilateral negotiation, and it was. You know, Britain, China, Russia, all of them had diplomatic officials involved in the talks. So it was a big effort, and it really illustrates the difficulty and complexity of trying to reach an agreement that's more all-encompassing, that addresses a broad range of issues, including issues as complicated as the nuclear issue in Iran. And, you know, Trump, for better or worse, just has not had the chops for that. That style of diplomacy that is big picture, complicated, and multilateral, he really struggles with that. In fact, he actively avoids it. He goes out of his way to try to angle for bilateral negotiations, because generally those are smaller in scope and require fewer players and fewer calculations. It's much simpler diplomatic and political calculus when you've just got one guy on the other side of a table, as opposed to a whole bunch of guys talking about a whole bunch of different things. So Trump's approach to diplomacy, I think, is being shown. Well, the flaws of Trump's approach to diplomacy, I think, are on display here.
Well, to me, it seems like motivation-wise, it's taking the shortest rush path to self-congratulation.
Yeah, he has a consistent pattern of that, certainly. That's an overarching trend that's common throughout all of the different types of diplomatic interactions that he and his administration have been in. And I guess that kind of relates to the tree shaking analogy I've used before. Their approach to diplomacy is to try to shake things up, shake the tree, see what falls out. If something falls out, great. If nothing falls out, well, that's fine. Then they just walk away and then shake somebody else's tree. So yeah, that short-termism, that sort of style of thinking that you should just try to apply pressure and get what you can, and if you can't, then walk away. That permeates his diplomatic style. But like I said, it's a bad fit for an issue like the IRGC and the nuclear issue and the Strait of Hormuz issue, now that that's kind of part of the talks as well. Because then you're getting into things like, sovereignty, nationalism, and whatnot, and they're going to be just as unwilling and prideful as Trump himself is in negotiating issues like that. And Trump doesn't negotiate with people like him very well that go hard in negotiations. He prefers weaker counterparties because generally they're vulnerable enough to pressure that he can just dominate them. But that maneuvering has not worked here. He probably genuinely thought Iran was in a much weaker negotiating position and that they would fold in the first couple of days. I think there's pretty decent evidence of that at this point, but it's open to debate still. But regardless, I think it fits his style and psychology in negotiating that he would move forward with a relatively risky operation because he thought it was actually not risky and because he thought the counterparty was weaker. And the Iranians, in surprising him, have put him in an awkward position that he's not normally in. And I think that's part of the reason he's been struggling more with this one than he has in past negotiations. He has not gotten his pick of counterparty here.
He wants easy wins.
Yeah. But to bring this full circle, that's why I don't think it's really just down to manipulating markets. I think he genuinely did want to try to do a thing here, and it blew up in his face, and he's struggling to reach some kind of conclusion. Let's see, was there another country you wanted to get to?
How's Russia been doing with the war and conscription and so on? Is everything kind of continuing apace in the Ukraine war?
Pretty much. It's on trend. There haven't been any big changes, last I checked anyway. Yeah, the Russian economy is something I've read more about over the past couple months, less so the war itself. The Russian economy is kind of holding together, and obviously they got a nice tailwind. That's the correct word. They got a nice tailwind from the Iran drama because of higher oil prices. But in general, the analysis last year, and that seems to be more and more accurate this year, is that 2026 was going to be a crunch year for the Russian economy, because the economy has adapted to being mobilized for war. So it hasn't collapsed like some people were saying it might early on in the conflict, but it has come under more and more strain over time. The Russian government itself is kind of having to be more and more creative with sourcing tax revenue to pay for the conflict. And while the Russian economy has adapted, it's having more and more dire side effects for regular Russians. There is more inflation, interest rates are still pretty high. There's some benefit to war spending, factory work and whatnot, things like that. But it's offset to a degree by the inflation. And it's not clear if they'll be able to maintain the kind of government spending that is basically the cornerstone of the Russian economy right now. So kind of a mixed bag for regular Russians in the sense that they're getting more money from the state than they would normally on account of the war, but the Russian economy cannot entirely handle the degree of demand that is being made of it. And the result then is inflationary pressure. And also, correspondingly, a bunch of financial tricks implemented by Russia's equivalent of the Department of the Treasury to try to control flows of capital, control flows of the currency, etc. If you want to try to maintain this kind of control over your economy, especially its finances, so that you can direct financial flows into the war effort, you need a lot of draconian rules regarding capex, capital flows, capital expenditure, etc. And those will work in the short term, but over the long term, you're going to have more and more of a negative effect, because all of that money could have been put into productive economic use, and instead you're using it to buy like one-off bombs, one-off missiles, etc. That goes back to the guns and butter thing I mentioned last week. Russia is leaning very heavily into the guns over the butter right now. Mm-hmm. And that'll have negative effects for the long-term trajectory and growth trend of the Russian economy. That's not going to be that noticeable right now or in the short term, but in the long term, it will have a noticeable effect. Yeah, other than that, though, they're still hanging on. I don't think they've been doing any big mobilizations recently. I think they're still relying on their traditional conscription system, which was mandatory service for 1 year for men who turn 18, although with some exceptions. But they have not been using those conscripts in the Ukraine conflict. I think they've been trying to siphon them into non-combat roles and other sort of roles that are peripheral to the conflict in Ukraine. It would be unpopular of them to try to force conscripts like that into the actual conflict. The Russian government has been trying to kind of create a firewall, so to speak, between the Russian people and the consequences of the conflict. And one of the ways they do that is to try to lean as much as possible on foreign soldiers and also contract soldiers. Guys who are kind of paid to fight. I guess they're all technically paid to fight, but contract soldiers are kind of different than professional soldiers, who are different in turn than conscripts. So the contract soldiers are meant to act as a substitute for a broader conscription campaign that they might use to generate the forces that they need, but which would generate political backlash. So they've been relatively successful in doing that. There's relatively little sense in Russia that you're going to be drafted and immediately sent to the front. That's not really a thing. There's some concern about it, but for the most part, the Russian government has been sufficiently reliant on flows of contract soldiers, both domestic and foreign, and the professional military, and volunteers as well, to avoid like broader conscription. Whether or not they can continue that or not, though, I've seen some debate about that. There's some sense that the Russian government can't have its cake and eat its too in this regard for too much longer. They do take very high casualties at the front. The Ukrainians do too, but people talk less about that for obvious reasons. Ukrainians have their own manpower problem, but the Russians do too, because they've been relatively shy about doing full-on mass mobilization. So we could reach a point where they have to, if they want to continue the war, either do a major mass mobilization or come up with some other source. Maybe significantly up the payment for contracts, or maybe do some kind of foreign recruiting. You can amp up there, but from what I've read, the trajectory right now is that it's unsustainable in the long term. Something's going to have to give sooner or later. Hypothetically, they could do a major mass mobilization and conscript large numbers of young Russian men and just try to suppress the public discontent from doing so. I could see that as being conceivable, but I don't know if Moscow cares enough about the conflict to go that far. That's debatable. Certainly, I don't feel like they think they're under enough pressure to think it's necessary. They're
What
not
percentage
making
of their
rapid
budget is the war, roughly?
Sorry, what?
What percentage of their budget is the war?
I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's high. I think it's over 50% now.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, it's expensive. It's expensive shit. I think you pointed that out on like the first day of the conflict. Like, war is very expensive, and it's going to eat up a good chunk of their budget. You know, as the economy has kind of struggled more and more as the conflict has progressed, it's become more and more of a problem. Probably they'll make it through the year okay, but they may have to jump through more and more elaborate hoops in order to make it happen. Yeah, I don't think I've read too much about the front line in Ukraine lately. As far as I know, it's still incremental gains by one or the other side, generally Russia. I think Russia started pushing west into Zaporizhia from Donetsk in the past couple months. And I think they've got another operation in northeastern Ukraine. But other than that, it's nothing too dramatic. Pretty much just more of the same.
Our Ukrainian friend Bitter Sugar is still alive and well.
Oh, yeah, how's he doing?
He popped by stream maybe 2 days ago.
Hanging in there?
Yep. For those who didn't see, whenever the war in Ukraine started, we had a friend of the stream who was willing to basically do live interview right as stuff was happening, so we got a first-hand account of what it was like. And as with any war is messy, and it impacts a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and even if it doesn't impact you personally, it'll usually impact your relatives. But for Bitter Sugar, who's in Kyiv, it was getting bombed at the time, so there was all that stress of you have to take shelter in a specific place, and there are alarms that are going off all the time. So everyone's basically highly stressed, not able to sleep much. It's a very scary thing. And one of their homes was basically taken over by Russia. They had to leave, and I think it was mined up or something. So it definitely had some very real consequences, and it's interesting to be able to talk to someone who has that first-hand vantage point. A lot of times when you hear about a war, you're going through some news agency that always has a bias of some kind, and individuals have a bias as well, but you do get to cut out the middle actor in that. So that was a very cool thing we got to do with Bitter Sugar.
Yeah, it wasn't just bombing. That was in the early days of the war, early weeks of the war, when the Russians were at the doorstep of Kiev. Mm-hmm. They actually had some units doing thunder runs on the outskirts of the city. Yeah, I think he actually talked in the video about seeing the remains of some of the fighting on the outskirts of the city. So it was very much at his doorstep at the time, the actual ground fighting, not just the bombing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a wild interview for sure.
So thank you to our international chat for expanding our perspective. Good work.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the fun things about doing this. You get to hear from all kinds of people. You don't just have to take my word for it. Mm-hmm. We get some primary sources on here.
I think we did have some more questions coming in as well.
Oh, cool. Well, would you mind taking like a 5-10 minute break?
Go ahead.
Feeling a little sick. So, my apologies.
Take care of yourself. Up to me as well, because if you want to wrap up early, we can do that too.
Will do.
You're granted a break.
Be right back.
Too many Subway sandwiches. Chat, you may ask me anything instead. Ha ha ha. Got lots of nice raids during the show. I don't always shout them out the moment they happen, just to maintain his continuity of thinking. We've had some nice games. His train of thought. It's the thinking train. Sometimes your thinking train is thinking about something that's very, very off topic. Slap chop or neuro chop, which is better for the kitchen? Slap chop, is that from the ShamWow guy? Slap chop sounds like a crazy karate move. It's from Los Angeles street karate. Yep. Our bravest overlord was murdered. Bruh. What? You know you hate making salad. What are we bruhing about? The bruh sounds a lot like how dogs go bruh. Bruh. We are old. We're not old. When we are 85 years old, then we'll be old. Some people are crisply 30 years old and they're like, oh no, it's over for me, I'm old. You're old. Go to the future and get your 85-year-old self to slap the shit out of you right now. Just time machine it over. So you see some crazy grandpa go through a portal and you're like, what the fuck? And then the person just walks up and slaps the shit out of you. And they're like, you're not old. We get old later on. You're young. Shut up and enjoy it. And you're like, oh my god. You're 45 years old. I don't know. This is a mech or bio player. Let's just get a roach horn. Okay. Something was there. Not sure what. Keep making queens. Keep up the injects. Always will love StarCraft. I got into YouTube like a week ago. You remember me from SC2 days and you felt old? Ah, I see. Yeah, that was 10 years ago now, so we've been in the Twitch game for a while. For a hecking while. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh shit. All the bases need a spore and a queen to maintain the injects. I don't know if it's mech or bio. Let's get an overseer for our queens. Try to send some lings for a scout. Okay. We're doing stuff. You went from SC2 to WoW since WoW requires 0 APM. Well, much lower APM for sure. I don't know about directly at 0. Okay, opponent has a third. What class you play WoW? I played a shitload of WoW. Led a guild, was main tank for Vanilla Classic, Vanilla BC, or BC Classic, and then Wrath Classic. Fuck's sake. I want to get Bane speed ASAP. I have 76 workers, not bad. Bane speed. Microbio. Let's take a peek. A bunch of Marines and Hellbats. Okay. I think I want to chill and wait for my queens. Losing this is not a big deal because their play here is a low gas, high aggression move. Okay. I have more bombas on the way. Okay. Could be worse. Let's get some links for evasion, and then get some creep. Okay, I see more units coming. Get a hive. Should try for another base too. They're really trying to YOLO at my fourth. Make sure I don't get one. Okay, they have a bunch of dudes there. Oops, did not mean for those to go. They do not have a fourth. Okay, let's just cancel this. And they're playing very all in. These Marines are very hurt. Well, okay. Yeah, they're crazy. I would not want to work for them if I was a Marine. I'll tell you. Okay. Finally, they're expanding. I'm not taking this right now. Two is almost done. Take better trades at that point. $33 going nice. I'm guessing they have 2-2 upgrades. Gonna try to grab the tanks when they're looking to position. They'd have more Banes coming. Lovely. This is Agent Smith. Did you miss him? He's taking a restroom break. Give him a minute. Just a few moments for Master Smith. Expand away from this right now because my army's not in position to defend. I bet this is walled. Yep. Oh, crazy scan. Okay, well, I think the Lings need to come back and help. I'll try to break through. Wow. Holy shit, the Ultras won the fight. No shot. They did. Nice. Three almost done too. We're still in this. Not in a good position, but I'm in a position. Now they have 3-3. Oh, good. Good job. This map has been hard to counterattack Terran on, because this is a 3 depot wall. And when I've been trying to attack here, Terran have the reinforcements blocking this, so this base you can attack going this way, it just takes a really long amount of time to get the Lings there. Nice job. Hydra is probably safer than Mute on this map, because a lot of Terrans are playing to kind of shove an all-in with tier 2 units. Nidus can't afford Nidus, because they're playing a cheese economy. So this is like 62 workers on the line. They're not going for ghosts or liberators or anything. It's just bio. So what we needed to do was have Lingbane Hydra. That would have been a much safer army comp than going for ultras. The Spire was expensive too. Didn't pay off for us. Zerg is so overpowered versus Terran. Once they realize we can't spread versus Banes, it's all over. The trick for good Terrans, I think, is that they pre-split their army. So instead of waiting until Banes are rolling at them and then, oh, I need to split, they split and then walk across the map when they're in smaller groups instead of just one big clump. How are your fingers and hands? You remember one reason you quit was your fingers hurt a lot from a session from SC2. My wrist and hand health has been pretty great. I have no chronic pain. I have no stiffness or issues with my hands or wrists. There are a couple things to look out for when you're looking at your mechanics. You want to make sure your forearms are on the desk. A lot of people are only touching the desk with their wrist, and that ends up putting all the strain of the weight of your arms on that one point. When if you have your forearms on the desk, then your hands and wrists aren't carrying all of that weight. Another way you can improve your mechanics is by lowering your mouse DPI. If your mouse DPI is over, I would say 1,200 or 1,600, it's probably too high. And that's meaning that you're using your wrist only to control your mouse movements. If your mouse DPI is lower, then you engage more of your forearm and a little bit of your shoulder. So the strain is distributed over a greater area. I've not had keyboard wrist strain problems, really. Or mouse. I lowered my mouse DPI to 400, specifically for microing Ling Bane stuff. It's really hard to select 2 Lings and right-click a Bane Ling if you have high DPI. You have weak fingers? Doing exercises helps too, like just general health and fitness and exercise. If you're more muscular and you have a better body composition, then there's just less general strain on your joints, because your joints and ligaments and so on are supported by more muscle tissue. So at this moment we have a brief intermission to discuss the cat. Come here. The cat, while a carnivore, does have some desire for social interaction. Cats are very fierce and ferocious animals, but some of them are willing to spend time with others, if only for a few seconds. This is a miniature jungle panther, just as dangerous as an actual jungle panther, except tiny. This one enjoys attention as well. We're awaiting Master Agent Smith, who's taking a restroom break. You like cat. This is cat. He's been looking at the pizza on the desk. But it's not a very carnivore-leaning pizza. It's got a bunch of goat cheese and stuff. He's like, let me have the pizza. You don't want the pizza. You're an obligate carnivore, and it's got a bunch of veggies on it. You can smell it. That's an onion. No. You don't want to eat an onion. He's just going to throw it up. He's a crazy purring machine. He'd rather have the goat than the cheese. Yes, but he really likes milk. I think a lot of cats like milk and cheese. I don't know if it's optimal for them. It's probably not optimal. It's not optimal for us either, I guess.
Sorry for the delay.
All good. You're always welcome to take a break. Your health comes first.
Did I miss anything?
We talked about cats and pizza.
Samurai pizza cats.
Mm-hmm. We also talked about dealing with wrist pain and so on from heavy gaming, especially like RTS stuff. And the two things that people can do to massively improve their health in that regard is have a deeper desk setup where your forearms are completely on the desk as you use your keyboard and mouse. So your keyboard and mouse are not right at the edge of your desk. I think mine are about maybe 8 inches in from the edge of the desk-ish. So that basically means the weight of my arms is not being pointed directly on the wrist where it meets the desk. It's on my forearms, and my hands can move freely without that pressure. That's point number 1, is forearms on the desk. Point number 2 is lower your mouse DPI. DPI is marketed to gamers like horsepower, but it's not an important stat really, because the higher your DPI, the less accurate you can be with precise movements. So I use 400 DPI. A lot of pros in games use 800 DPI. 1200 I would say is like fine to be competitive, but it's hard to do some of the really micro movements. And if you have 1600 or above, you're almost in what I would argue is the too high category, where your cursor just flies across the screen from the tiniest movement, which means all the strain of moving the cursor around goes on your wrist instead of distributed from your wrist to your forearm to your shoulder. If you're playing slower paced games like turn-based stuff, it doesn't matter. You're not actually like smashing buttons that fast, but if you're playing a spammy game, it can matter.
Well, I'll try to remember that as I use my mouse on the paper towel on my desk.
Is that your mouse pad?
I actually have a mouse pad, but it's so old and dingy that it doesn't really work. So I started putting paper towels on top of it, and that seems to help.
Bro, just get you a mouse pad.
Yeah, paper towels are cheaper.
Yeah, but paper towels don't have awesome art on them. I guess unless you draw it. I have a mouse pad of Drow Ranger and Queen of Pain from Dota.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And I have another one.
My mouse pad is considerably less tasteful than that. Yeah, my mouse pad is a legacy. You might have actually seen it back in the day. It was a gift from my now ex-girlfriend, maybe like 10, 15 years ago, whenever it was. It's one of those novelty anime titty mouse pads.
You
Have
still
you
use
seen those?
that?
Yeah, I still got that.
Wow.
I don't know why she bought it for me.
No, I think we all got one of those. Like they got a few of them and brought them back, right? Because I
Oh, is
got,
that what it was?
yeah, I think they got 3 of them when they were in China or something. I tried to use it, but it's really hard to game with those. You've got
Yeah,
your
they're a little small,
wrist in
right?
like a hecking valley.
Yeah. I actually started flipping mine the other way around for that specific reason, just to kind of get the valley out of the way,
I
so
see.
to speak. Oh, okay. Anime titties aside, I think you mentioned we had 2 more questions. Is there info available about specifics of Ukraine's new cooperation with Gulf countries? Do we know what anti-drone help they're providing to defend against Iran and what Ukraine is getting in return that could help them defend against Russia? There is information about it, but there's not a lot of details right now. So the GCC nations have definitely expressed an interest in buying various technologies from Ukraine, but they're not really talking very openly about exactly what they're buying. I did read in one defense publication that some of the GCC buyers are actually unhappy with what they've bought from Ukraine thus far. Not because the equipment is bad per se, but because the equipment, in order to be used effectively, generally requires experienced personnel, and they don't really have any of those. So there needs to be an interest in buying not just the equipment, but also some degree of training, some degree of institutional transfer of knowledge, stuff like that. Sort of the software side, well, not software, literally speaking, but like some of the human capital, so to speak, that the Ukraine has built up in these relevant technologies has to be moved over in addition to the technology in order for the GCC nations to actually get use out of it. So again, there were no details about what exactly it was that they were having trouble using, but apparently there were some difficulties there. And that could be why the GCC nations were struggling so much, even right up until the ceasefire with drones and whatnot, despite the fact that they're like easy to shoot down. It's not hard to bring down a Shahed. Ukraine does it with some alacrity, but the GCC was having trouble pulling it off. So I suspect, and this is speculation on my part, so I'll throw out the usual disclaimer actually. This is a good cue for it. I'm not an expert in everything I talk about on here. I have more of a background in foreign policy and economics. So if I ever say anything wrong, stupid, or biased, please let me know. If I'm wrong, I want to know more than anybody. So participation by chat is encouraged in that regard. I don't read chat while we do this, but I will read it later. So we do appreciate the feedback we get. So that said, I suspect from what I read about some of the difficulties with the early purchases that there probably will be a deeper defense relationship that is cultivated going forward that will go beyond just trying to buy individual items of equipment, whatever they may be. There will probably be not only that, but also some transfer of personnel, training, etc. Some degree of integration, so to speak, between the two defense bodies, the Ukrainian military and GCC militaries. But beyond that, yeah, I don't know enough about it to really get into specifics of what they're buying. Let's see. Can you speak on the role of India aiding Bangladesh and Sri Lanka throughout the war between US and Iran? Possible further strain on US-India relations? No, I don't think it's going to strain relations between India and the US. I don't think India is all that put off by it. I'm sure it's a problem in the short term. But India has gotten an exemption from the US to buy oil from Russia. So, they can source that from them. There's going to be other stuff they get from the Middle East that will be disrupted. There could be issues there. But I think they have enough inventories to kind of pull through. So the Indian economy is not under severe strain from the conflict in Iran and the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. And I don't think anybody expects it to last long enough to kind of reach the point where it will break the Indian economy. If it does, then the diplomatic calculus will change. Maybe then you'll see some pressure from New Delhi, but for now anyway, they've been remarkably quiet. I even read an article in Foreign Policy kind of arguing that the conflict has seen Pakistan kind of achieve additional diplomatic capital internationally because of the forthright way that the initiative that they've shown in trying to become mediator. India, by contrast, has been pretty passive. So whether that passivity is a strategic choice or is just a result of them not being sufficiently ambitious and proactive, I don't really know. But regardless, they haven't really complained too much from what I've seen about the conflict. So I don't think there's going to be tension there. And in so much as India is helping Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, that actually benefits India because it helps them build India's relationship with those countries. In the case of Bangladesh, that's sorely needed because Indo-Bangladeshi relations have kind of been deteriorating significantly over the past couple of years on account of the Bangladeshi public's disdain for the Indian government's position on the ousted prime minister that was ousted from power during the mass protests. When was it, like a year or two ago? The Indian government was on friendly terms with that prime minister. I'm struggling to remember her name. I think it was Sheikh Hasina, no? I want to say it was Sheikh Hasina. Anyway, she was on good terms with India, so when she was ousted, she fled Bangladesh and went to India, and the Indian government has refused to extradite her, despite the new Bangladeshi government's pleas to do so. And that has led a lot of people in Bangladesh to be pretty upset with New Delhi. Because in the best of times, the Bangladeshi public is suspicious of India because it's so much bigger and more powerful. India generally hasn't thrown its weight around too much vis-a-vis Bangladesh, but there's always suspicion that they could. And so the fact that India had a friendly relationship with people that a lot of folks in Bangladesh saw as a dictator for more than 10 years soured a lot of people on India. And then the fact that they're refusing to extradite her now that she's been pushed out of power has soured the public even more. So if Bangladesh is under pressure from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and India is helping them, that's beneficial for New Delhi, foreign policy-wise, in terms of managing its relations in South Asia. That gives them an opportunity to try to offset some of the damage that's been done over the past decade. So in that sense, it's actually kind of beneficial. I'm not sure what they're doing with Sri Lanka, but it helps there if they're providing aid. There's not as much of an imperative as with Bangladesh, but every little bit helps. Sri Lanka's been kind of out of the news for a while. The last I remember, they had a new communist government in power. Haven't heard hardly anything about them since then.
Sri Lanka is a communist government.
Yeah, a communist party was able to win a slim majority, as I recall, in the last election. All of the establishment parties had basically delegitimized themselves. They were seen as basically too corrupt, too incompetent, just lost the confidence of the voting public. And so that opened the door for an outside party, and that was the communists, like the biggest outside party that people found to be a plausible alternative to the establishment was the Communist Party of Sri Lanka. So they were voted in, and they've been taking a crack at governing the past couple years. I don't think they have too much to show for it. They haven't really had a lot of resources to work with. It was because of an economic crisis that the establishment delegitimized itself. And that meant that the incoming new communist government had little in the way of tax revenue that they could throw towards things like major reforms or spending programs or stuff like that. So somewhat ironically, the new communist government has been defined somewhat by austerity. They basically have no choice but to make cuts to government spending on account of the decline in the tourism economy and the decline in exports that has occurred on account of the debt crisis that the previous Rajapaksa government had instigated.
Why is their tourism declining?
At first, it was because of COVID back in 2020. That led to a collapse in global tourism for obvious reasons. People were concerned about contracting COVID, or government restrictions made it prohibitive. Either way, anybody and everybody who had a tourism-dependent economy suffered inordinately during the COVID period, which lasted through 2020 and then most of 2021, maybe in some places into 2022. And tourism has not really recovered since then in Sri Lanka. There are other alternatives that have kind of been more attractive. Let's see. That's all we had for questions then.
Chat's buzzing about France now. They did anything recently?
We've got the election next year, and they had that murder that we talked about. I don't know if you remember that. There was that guy who was providing security for a far-right lesbian co-op of some kind.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that guy ended up in a confrontation with a far-left group and was effectively beaten to death. So that's led to a lot of consternation and churn within French politics over the past couple months. But I'm not sure what people are talking about right now. I'm not aware of any new big events that have happened in the past week. Well, we did have a couple countries that had elections.
Which ones?
Peru and Bulgaria specifically. Yeah, Peru's politics have been pretty dramatic over the past 10 years, just whipsawing from one part of the political spectrum to the other, moving from one presidential administration to the other in short order. There's been a lot of churn in Peru over to the past 10 years, and they're in the throes of an election right now as we speak. It's going to go to a runoff because nobody made more than 18% of the vote in the first round. And a whole bunch of people were running. So it's going to go to a runoff. I don't think it's clear who the top two are yet, because I don't think all of the votes are in, but last I checked, Fujimori was in first place and then Sanchez in second. So for those who don't remember, Keiko Fujimori is the daughter of the previous president, Fujimori, who had governed Peru as a dictator in the late 80s and early 90s. So she is associated with the right wing of Peruvian politics, if not the far right, depending on who you ask. And generally when she's discussed, there is concern that she may try to emulate her father and become a despot to some degree. She's run for president multiple times now. She's never won. Generally, she comes up just short. I think she made the runoff in the last presidential election as well, and ended up losing to Castillo, the guy who ended up getting impeached later on for trying to launch a not-all-gulp. That's a self-coup. So she's running again. She'll be in the runoff most likely, I would expect, at least given the results I saw earlier. Second place is Sanchez, who is a left-wing candidate. He actually received the endorsement of the former president, Castillo, who endorsed him from prison. Not sure how valuable that endorsement is from prison, but there are a lot of people on the left in Peru who still like Castillo, so presumably it was helpful. Sanchez also served in Castillo's cabinet, so they are kind of conflated with each other. He's also an ally of Antaro Humala, former member of the military who served 17 years in prison for participating in a pro-indigenous ethnic nationalist uprising. I imagine this would have been back more in the 80s and early 90s. He's actually the brother of a former president, President Humala, who governed Peru for a while in the early 80s. So basically, Sanchez has legit left-wing credentials. He's tied with some pretty powerful left-wing figures in Peru's politics. He's second place, or at least he was when I last checked up on the results. And if it comes down to a runoff between Fujimori and Sanchez, what I read is that nobody knows what the outcome will be because nobody actually did polling on that, because it wasn't thought likely that Sanchez would make it to the runoff. There was actually another right-wing candidate besides Fujimori who was thought to be the most likely to make it to the runoff. And he was seen as right-wing like Fujimori, but more explicitly pro-Trump, almost obsequious. And it's looking like he's not going to make the runoff. So that's kind of a surprise outcome that pollsters were not prepared for. So if it's the case that it does end up being Fujimori versus Sanchez in the runoff, it'll actually look very similar to the last presidential election where the runoff was Fujimori versus Castillo. And much like that election, it's not entirely clear who's going to win. So we'll see how it goes. We'll also look at whatever new polling will be done in the interceding days between the first and second rounds of the election. But we could be in for another nail biter. I also read that Sanchez performed well amongst Peru's poor voters, but that Fujimori received support from across the country's quote-unquote socioeconomic spectrum. So Sanchez has more support from probably the major voting bloc in Peru's politics, but Fujimori has more of an even balance of support amongst different factions and across the spectrum of Peru's politics. So we'll see which ends up being able to tip the balance. I think I read in that same article that Peru's legislature, regardless of the outcome in the presidential election, is going to be majority right-wing. So I think that's pretty much set in stone now. So if they do get a Fujimori victory in the second round, there will be something resembling a unified right-wing government in Peru, controlling the executive and the legislature. Although I don't know how much of the legislature will be controlled by Fujimori's party specifically. There's actually a range of right-wing parties that are going to be sharing power. So it may not be that a Fujimori presidency would be able to just get its way, regardless of context or circumstances. Now, by contrast, if Sanchez wins, then we're going to have divided government in Peru. It'll be right-wing legislature, left-wing executive. And given how dysfunctional Peru's politics has been over the 10 years, that's probably not going to augur stability going forward. We shall see. And then the other election I wanted to mention was Bulgaria. They're in the throes of an election right now as well. They've had some political instability over the past couple of years themselves. They're apparently having their 8th snap election since 2021. So that's 8 snap elections in just 5 years. That's quite a lot, really.
They must love elections.
Now, there's just been a lot of churn and instability for a variety of reasons. Both Romania and Bulgaria have had a number of mass protest movements over the past 10 years. Let's see, in the case of this election, it's looking like the left nationalist Eurosceptic political party is in the lead, the Progressive Bulgaria Party. So these are people who lean more towards Russia and are skeptical of the European Union. That's not to say they want to leave. They're not explicitly anti-EU, but they prefer to they prefer to maintain as much sovereignty as possible for their state while still remaining in the EU. Generally, that's the position of most Eurosceptic parties, with some exceptions on the fringes. And like I mentioned, they're sort of left nationalist in orientation. So not quite like Trump in the sense that they're right-wing populists, kind of similar populist outlook, but more of a left lean by contrast to Trump. The establishment parties are not doing well from what I read. So most likely it will be a progressive Bulgaria party in power going forward. We'll see for how long that lasts. A few of the other parties that have formed majorities in Bulgaria have lasted all that long over the past couple of years. So it may not be long before we have another slap election, but we'll see. Certainly Moscow will be pleased by the outcome. No sooner does Orban and his government in Hungary lose an election than a gaggle of other sort of similar parties are able to win victories in other countries. Similar in the sense that they're vaguely populist and Eurosceptic. Obviously, Orban was very, very right-wing in terms of his alignment. Progressive Bulgaria is the opposite, much more leftist in nature. Actually, that reminds me, I did have a correction I needed to do. So I'll throw that out. So I mentioned the president. No, I think it's prime minister. Let me fact check that. I was talking about Czechia and how they have a populist government right now. Yeah, it's prime minister. So the prime minister in charge in Czechia is a guy named Babis, maybe Babis. I welcome correction from chat on that. I was apparently mispronouncing his name. Actually, I was just getting his name wrong last time when I was talking about this. I was pronouncing his name Babrij, which is not even remotely close. So it is apparently Babis. Also, I mispronounced a word last week that apparently confused some people, so my apologies. This is one I've tripped up on before, and I think Neuro here, you've actually corrected me on this before, and I guess it didn't stick. So the word I was trying to say was trough, and I was using it in terms of some data, like something had troughed, it had declined. And so that was what I was trying to say, but instead I pronounced it trow. So trowed. And nobody knew what the fuck that was supposed to mean, because that's not even remotely close to trough. So my apologies for the confusion. I don't think I'd ever heard anybody say trough out loud before maybe like 5 to 10 years ago. So all my life I've been pronouncing it trough in my head, or trow rather, in my head.
A crest and trough of the wave is how I would hear it.
There you go. So I'll try to do better in future.
Big of you to admit you were wrong about something.
And it's a recurring problem. I'm unfortunately very fallible. Well, we might wrap up a little sooner this time.
Sure.
The gods of sub sandwiches have been cruel to me today, Neuro.
Oh no.
So I don't think we have any more questions. Yeah, we're good. So I might, what, are you in game right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but if you want to bow out, you can certainly do so.
Well, before I did have one weird story that I could just throw out.
Sure, we like weird, silly stuff.
So there was a Japanese soldier. I don't think I've talked about this on here before, but there was a Japanese soldier who decided to raid one of China's embassies in Japan. He did this on his own initiative. Apparently, he was upset at China about the recent scuffle between Tokyo and Beijing about the Taiwan comments that have been made by Japan's Prime Minister, Ms. Takaichi. So this guy was sufficiently mad about it to basically break in to a Chinese embassy and to confront some of the personnel within, basically bitching them out and trying to make a statement about Chinese belligerence vis-a-vis Japan. Apparently his original plan was to commit suicide. I think I read that more recently, but that didn't end up happening, and so he ended up just being escorted out and then arrested. Unusual belligerence from Japanese there. Normally even the far right in Japan is relatively well behaved. They don't generally go for theatrical stunts like that. It's not to say they haven't had theatrical stunts before, but generally they're non-violent. They don't generally break into embassies. That's like some shit I would expect to read out of the 1930s in Japan. That's a throwback. Oh, yeah, I had some other weird news for you. It's not necessarily that weird, but I know how much you and chat love hearing about Djibouti.
Oh yeah, that's one of the best countries.
So I thought I'd throw in that they had an election too recently. The incumbent presidential candidate, Ismail Omar Gula, won re-election. And he won re-election with 97.8% of the vote.
Wow, that's very convincing.
Yeah, it's quite high. So this is going to be his 6th term in office, extending his 27-year rule.
Wow.
I would point out that there was only one opposition candidate running, a Mr. Mohammed Farah Samatar, who represented a small party with no representation in parliament. Apparently there are significant opposition parties in Djibouti, but they had all boycotted the election. In fact, they have been boycotting elections since 2016, 10 years now, accusing election authorities of lacking impartiality. So as you can imagine, it was not entirely a free and fair election. The outcome was not really in doubt. Kind of reminds me of the CIA telling Diem back in the 60s not to win the election with 99% of the vote, because then everybody will know that he rigged it.
Yeah.
So what does he do? He wins with 99% of the vote anyway, just completely ignores them. You know, if you're going to rig it, you might as well pick a believable number, so at least you have some plausible deniability. But some guys don't go for that. Some guys want the 97.8%.
It sounds too good to win that hard. I can't resist it. Damn. I guess the opposition party in Djibouti got clapped.
That's putting it. That's putting it mildly. But it's a good pun. There's that too.
Thank you. That's what I'm here for. He's here for the research and journalism and stuff. I'm here for the butt jokes. Got to keep that relatability factor up, you know.
Well, speaking of butt jokes, I did have an ass update. For those who don't remember, ASS is the Alliance of Sahelian States, which is the alliance of military juntas that have seized power over the past 5-some years in the Western Sahel, in Western Africa. One of the members of which is Burkina Faso, and the general, actually not even general, he was just a captain. The captain who seized power there, one Ibrahim Traoré, did an interview recently on state television. And he had some interesting things to say about the direction that his military junta is going to take. When he took power, he promised, after doing so, that democratization would happen within just a few years. I think it was actually within 1 year, is what he originally said. So this is the first big interview where he's actually talked about public policy and just what direction he wants to go in since then. So what did he talk about? Well, one of the things he said is that democracy, quote unquote, kills, and that the people of Burkina Faso must, quote unquote, forget it. He also suggested that most Africans do not actually want democracy, and that Burkina Faso had its own alternative approach to democracy. The article I read, more specifically the author of the article I read about this, noted very pointedly that no details were given about the actual alternative.
They don't like democracy. I won't tell you what they do like, but it's not democracy.
Yeah. So while he did not propose an alternative system, he did add, quote, "We have our own approach. We're not even trying to copy anyone else. We're here to completely change the way things are done," end quote. He also said that he considered political parties to be divisive, dangerous, and incompatible with the revolutionary project. And he emphasized that the new system that they would cultivate would be rooted in sovereignty, patriotism, and revolutionary mobilization, with traditional leaders and grassroots structures playing a central role. All of which sounds very lovely, but I would point out also doesn't actually mean anything.
I don't know how lovely it sounds. It sounds like an authoritarian, nationalistic, one-party regime.
Yep, that's kind of it in a nutshell. But he's being very vague about it. These are all just sort of generic things that people will like, but it doesn't actually outline a plan for a new government or governance.
Speaking of hollow words that don't mean what they're saying and are used as a political tool, have you seen the Sacha Baron Cohen movie, The Dictator?
I've heard of it, but I have not seen it.
It is funnier now than it was before the Iran War.
Really?
Yes. It has a lot of references to like Gaddafi and things like this. You would probably enjoy it more than the average person because a lot of the elements of the character that he plays, who is a dictator of a fictitious country, the elements of his lifestyle and what he has around him are directly grabbed from other dictators around the world. It's quite funny. If you've seen Borat or Ali G and you found those amusing, then this one's definitely the same stuff, and it's very good. It needs to be pointy. Yeah.
In the era of the strongman, I could see how that would be true.
What year did this come out?
It's been a while. I don't think I've heard of him in some time.
2012.
Wow.
Yeah, very funny. Political satire, black comedy film.
Yeah, he's kind of known for those, isn't he?
Yeah, that's his style for sure. Megan Fox has a cameo in it. Anna Faris plays I guess the caricature of a lefty from LA, like a very LGBT forward, vegan, all this kind of stuff. And his character interacting with her is like super, super funny, the way he goes about that. So if you want to watch a dumb, silly movie, I would recommend that one. I watched it recently because it was on Prime Video.
Yeah, I think his stuff has been on my to-watch list somewhere, but it tends to get crowded out by some other options. You know how it is with having an infinitely long to-watch list. Well, I'll just finish up here real quick for you. There's a couple more items from the interview. Another quote: "The truth is, politics in Africa, or at least what we've experienced in Burkina, is that a real politician is someone who embodies every vice. a liar, a sycophant, a smooth talker. End quote. He also emphasized the importance of economic and military self-reliance, as well as hard work, saying that working 6 or 8 hour days would not enable Burkina Faso to catch up with richer countries. So some broader notes that go beyond just that interview. He had pledged to, again, restore democratic rule by July 2024, and instead they had announced that they would extend military junta rule for another 5 years. They also announced some new repressive measures, including a ban on all political parties, nominally justified as part of a plan to, quote, rebuild the state, unquote. And he's also suppressed dissent, cracked down on opposition, media, and civil society groups. Apparently, he has gained something of a cult following in broader Africa because he has a Pan-Africanist ideology and vision, and also likes to shit on the West. Yeah. So he's a crowd pleaser in many ways, but perhaps less so in his own country at this point.
So kind of like pan-Arab nationalism, but for Africa?
Yeah, Pan-Africanism actually is a real thing. It was one of the leading political forces in Africa in the decolonization period after World War II. So that's definitely been a prominent force there. A lot of Pan-Africanists ended up being corrupt, con man, et cetera. Or if not those, then at least violent. But there definitely were some that embodied the spirit of Pan-Africanism in their rule and became heroes for it. I think Sankara from Central African Republic was one of the early heroes. And then I think there was a actually military officer who seized power in Ghana in the 1980s, who also gained a following as a Pan-Africanist, as a successful, I should say, Pan-Africanist.
Yeah, it's the in-group expanding beyond just the nation, but to the region, which you get less, I guess, similarity between the individuals in the in-group, because obviously African countries are different from each other and the Africans within them are, but you get more like total power and influence by joining a larger group like Africans. Like that's a much larger group than people of Zimbabwe or people of Burkina Faso or whatever. Same thing with Pan-Arab nationalism.
Yep. Yeah, lots of commonalities there. They largely emerged in a very similar environment, so maybe it's not too surprising. Both of them were very much geared towards destroying Western imperialism in their own countries and regions. And they also tended to take on more of a statist ideology. In the case of Pan-Africanism, more left-wing in nature, but also, I guess both of them are nationalist, broadly speaking, but I associate Pan-Arab nationalism especially with nationalism. They kind of leaned into it to the point where they modeled, some Pan-Arab nationalists anyway, modeled their style of politics and governance after fascists in Europe in the 1930s. And I don't think Pan-Africanists ever did that. So a little bit of a divide there, but yeah, the similar genesis for both movements resulted in them looking similar once they came into power after World War II.
I see. Well, very good. You've done the vast majority of a full episode, so we'll let you rest and recover from your subway venture. Always good to be well fed, but sometimes it goes a bit far.
Well, I mean, the dietary calculus I generally take into account Saturday before we do this specifically, so I don't have any problems, but the subway thing kind of threw everything into flux. So that combined with Taco Bell yesterday has resulted in difficulties.
Have an apple or a banana. Fruit with fiber, that's the good stuff. If I'm ever struggling a bit, apple is like probably the most effective at evening yourself out.
I'll take that into consideration. Fiber and fruit tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I don't know how much you like grains in your diet either, but I tend to feel like having oatmeal for breakfast every day is like I get at least one healthy, guaranteed, high fiber, high nutrient start to my day that gives me the carbs that I need, and it's delivered in a really healthy manner. So if I do have a hamburger or something that's like heavier and a lot more dense, then I at least had some oats to like keep myself pretty stable.
So how do you incorporate that into your diet? Like what specific foods would you recommend in that regard?
Anything that's unprocessed and just a natural food is going to be way easier processed than meat. I would think of like red meat as the heaviest thing that you can have. So you want to have that balanced out with breads and fruits and vegetables and things like this, beans, legumes, stuff like that. Anything that's hearty and unprocessed is like healing for yourself, and anything like Taco Bell is like your vice. You can enjoy it, but it should be enjoyed in moderation, balanced out by other stuff. Otherwise, you have to pay the penalty, which is upset stomach of some kind.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
I
like
think if not,
the oats and grains, anything that's plant material of some kind, and ideally not fucked with too much. Taco Bell's very cost efficient for how many calories you get per dollar, which I think, and people enjoy the taste of it too. Subway, I would say, is between Taco Bell and a healthy meal. Where if you
I
had it without the cheese and the good stuff, then it's technically healthy.
yeah, I was not eating the healthy version of Subway.
Yeah. Well, you can
You
get
know, it
like just bread and lettuce and just basic stuff, or you can get it with the meatballs and the melted cheese and it's toasted, and that's like the extra tasty version, but it's less healthy the more cheese you throw at it.
it might have been better if the footlong had been the tuna, because I did get the tuna sandwich as the
Oh yeah.
6 inch. So if I'd gotten that as the accidental footlong instead of the Italian BMT salami freak
Oh
monster
yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
I would have been better served. But that's not what fate had in store for me.
Yeah. Well, at least you have the short-term win of a tasty meal.
Very short term, but yeah, it was pretty good.
Well, not today, but
Say
I'll
the
give you
way.
your regular 15-minute walk challenge. I've been doing a 3 mile run every few days or so, and it's been painful but good. I tend to feel a lot more alert after I've gone for a run because you stress your body a little bit. But the nice thing is that's on your own terms, and you get to benefit from burning those calories and getting that movement for the rest of the day because it increases your just base rate of metabolism. You spend some energy, so then your body has to then burn more energy to maintain the new muscle that you built and need to repair.
Mm, I will do so.
Very good, sir. Thank you, Fuzzy Code, for learning questions. Thank you, Chat, for your interest. Thank you, Agent Smith, for your time. We'll see you on the next episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Yeah, thanks again. Always a privilege. Talk to you next time.
GG.